Welcome to In This Family, where I have in-depth conversations with fascinating people about mental health, family, the past, and the future. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray, President and CEO of Nexus Family Healing, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and your host. In This Family is presented by Nexus Family Healing. We are a national nonprofit mental health organization who helps youth and families heal from trauma and complex mental health challenges. We believe every child is worth it and every family matters. I want the listeners to know that suicide comes up quite a bit in this episode, as well as schizophrenia and depression. But the episode also shows that talking about some scary mental health topics and learning about them can be a path towards understanding and healing. Likewise, talking about a difficult childhood can position someone better to support families formed later on. Clancy Martin is a professor of philosophy and business ethics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's an award-winning author of fiction and nonfiction. He received the Pushcart Prize and a Guggenheim Fellowship. Clancy is the author of 14 books, including the memoir, How Not to Kill Yourself. That one is about his lifelong struggle with depression, his alcoholism, and his multiple suicide attempts. But the book and the interview I had with Clancy are ultimately about survival and healing and recovery. He's an incredibly warm and positive person, and I know you'll enjoy this conversation. Well, hello, Clancy Martin. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
So I wondered, Clancy, maybe if you could start from the beginning, if you could give a little quick intro to who your family is.
I have 5 children. I've been married 3 times. I'm still married to my 3rd wife, Amy, who's a writer. And I also come from a blended family. My mother divorced my dad, who is now deceased, when I was 4 or 5. I've never managed to pin down the chronology quite in my own head, and remarried my stepfather, Blair, who was actually my father's sponsor in AA, which he loved to endlessly repeat to us, his children. And Blair had 7 children, and there were 3 of us from the boys in my family. So I grew up in a family of 10 children in Calgary, Alberta, and both my father and my stepfather are dead. As I say, they've been dead for quite some time. My mom is still alive and well. She's in her mid 80s, and my stepbrothers and sisters, some have died, including one by suicide, one murdered by her boyfriend, and a great hero of mine, my sister Lisa, and my brothers, both now in Texas, as is my mom, but alive and well, and they've got children of their own, of course.
So you pretty much grew up with your mom and your stepdad in terms of a living situation?
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about your biological father and your relationship with him.
It was very close, given his distance. He left. He always said, I left you boys because otherwise I would have wound up in prison. I would have killed your stepfather. This was his thing. He left Calgary, moved to Florida, and then he had a complicated life. He made a bunch of money. He was a real estate developer, and he made a bunch of money at first in Florida, and then he lost all of his money. And as he told the story, he was sitting in the window of one of the buildings, one of the office buildings that he owned in Miami. And one of his tenants came in and said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm thinking of jumping out the window because I just lost all this money. And he said, well, before you do that, read this book. And it was a book by a guy called Ken Kai's, very big book in the 70s called The Handbook to Higher Consciousness. And it's basically sort of watered down Buddhism. It's about non-attachment. Very, very helpful, useful book. And my dad read it, and it changed his life. He moved to California, he did all kinds of cool things. He dropped acid with Timothy Leary. Supposedly, he was one of Shirley MacLaine's lovers for a time. He knew Ram Dass. He was friends with Ram Dass. He knew all these people in the 70s California New Age movement, and he became a New Age guru. And he started a thing called the Church of Living Love, which had locations in Scottsdale, Arizona, the island of Palm Beach, Florida. He was One of his parishioners was briefly the heiress to the Post fortune of, Post Toasties, the big, where she had a huge house on Palm Beach, right next to Mar-a-Lago, and in Palm Springs, California. And one thing that Palm Beach, Florida, and also Jupiter, Florida, Palm Beach, Jupiter, Palm Springs, and Scottsdale all have in common is lots of rich older women. And my father was an extremely handsome man and enormously charismatic and also an incredibly sexual person. And he used to drive around with red satin sheets in the trunk of his car because he would, like, if necessary, hastily make up a bed in a motel room or a hotel room. Oh, he was a character. But anyway, so he did that for a long time. But he also, according to my mother, ever since he was a teenager, but it's very hard for me to say, suffered from schizophrenia and got crazier and crazier through the course of the years. Sort of classic schizophrenic behaviors, but eventually suffering, pretty dramatic symptoms like real powerful hallucinations. I remember one time we were in a Denny's in Oregon. He got so angry with me that I wasn't responding to the questions of someone else who was in the booth at this Denny's with us, who was not there, was an invisible person. And I was like, Dad, I know you can see this person. I know you can hear that, but I cannot hear her questions. That's why I'm not responding to her. He got so angry, he actually threw a coffee cup at me. And this is a man, the most peaceable, the most loving, kind, gentle, sweet human being that you would ever meet. I mean, just so loving. I don't know how many times I saw my dad cry, hundreds of times. I don't think my children have ever seen me cry, except for like in a movie or like a song or some maudlin moment, I'll cry. But my dad would just cry at the drop of a hat. He just had this huge heart. But yeah, and he drove away. I was like, oh, where am I going to go now? I mean, we were on this long cross-country trip together.
And how old were you when this incident happened? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, I remember. I was 21 years old. I was supposed to sell encyclopedias. This is 1988, back when you could still get a job in the summer as a college student selling encyclopedias door to door. And I said, Dad, I can't go on a cross-country trip with you. I've got this gig selling encyclopedias. And he's like, well, how much do you think you make? And I said, oh, I think I'll make $7,000. And he said, well, what about if I pay you $7,000 to drive across the country with me? And I was like, okay, it's a deal. Of course, I never got the money. That was my dad. But yeah, we drove from Miami to Coos Bay, Oregon, where he was supposedly taking a job with Ken Kais. When we got there, it turned out Ken Kais had no idea what he was talking about. My dad got very angry, had a collapse, and then we drove part of the way back. I didn't go all the way back to Florida with him. By the time we got to Texas, where my older brother was, we had to hire a nurse to take him the rest of the day because he collapsed over the course of that drive into this kind of schizophrenic disaster. It was also tied up with his diabetes. It was complicated.
Well, you bring up the schizophrenia that your dad suffered from. Did you see any other behaviors earlier than that? Like what time frame did you see that behavior manifest itself?
My father attempted to kill his own parents twice when he was a teenager, once with a rifle and once by burning down a house that they were in. And my mom, the second time, was with the rifle, and that time his parents called the police, and he was arrested while they were at some high school dance. My mom was there with him when the police came into the high school dance to arrest him. And so she claims, she's like, Clancy, your father lived with this his whole life. It's just you guys only progressively noticed it more and more, but your father did not actually change that much. It was just who he was, which is probably the closer to the truth of the matter. I didn't know there was anything psych psychiatrically wrong with my father until, I started to notice in my teens, I guess, that like he told the same story too many times, and that he had trouble staying still, so he was just someone who always had to be moving, always. And if he wasn't walking, he was driving, and sometimes you get in the car with my dad, he'd be like, "Hey, Clancy, you want to go get a cold drink?" And he's always lived in the South. And after he left Canada, and I'd say, "Yeah, Dad, but you knew that, you might be getting in the car for 15 minutes, you might be getting in the car for 4 hours." But I loved that time with my dad because it was just the two of us, and we just talk, and I'd ask him questions, and I could ask him about philosophy. I could ask him, I mean, he was a very intelligent man, and he was quite learned given his area, which was sort of Eastern religion. Um, and so I could ask him all these. I could ask him about my life. I could ask him about my mom. I could ask him, about his life. I mean, I just had my dad all to myself for as long as we were in that car, and I loved it. And we grew up in Calgary, but we would go down to visit him for the summer for a month, 2 months at a time. And at Christmas, not every Christmas, but some Christmases, one of the best Christmases of my life, we were in California where he was living at that time. And we drove out to the beach, me and my older brother and my little brother and my dad, and it was Christmas Day, and it was a cold day, and we were somewhere like Santa Barbara, and we couldn't find anything to eat, and then we went to Kentucky Fried Chicken that was open, and we got like a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he had a blanket, and probably some blanket he was keeping in his car to bed women with. And we went out to the beach and spread the blanket and ate that Kentucky Fried Chicken on the beach, and I remember that very well. It was a really nice Christmas. But anyway, yeah. So we'd go down and visit him, and yeah, it wasn't really until that trip that I understood, oh, there is definitely something seriously wrong with my dad's brain, you know. He had jitters at that time. I think he was taking too much lithium, and a symptom of lithium poisoning can be those jitters. And I don't know all the different drugs he took, and he never actually got a diagnosis from a psychiatrist of schizophrenia or anything else. Then he wound up going back to Florida, and I think his car broke down. He was picked up by the police on the side of the road. They took him to a psychiatric hospital for indigent people in Miami. And he called me from that psychiatric hospital. I was only one of my brothers. My little brother and my older brother weren't taking his calls at that time. I was still taking his calls. He called me and he begged me to get him out of there. He said, "Clance, if you don't get me out of here, I'm going to die in here." And I said, "Dad, I think you're in the right place for right now." And then about a week later, the doctor called and he was dead. And I don't, they lost his body. They lost his body, is what they claimed. And they sent us some ashes, but they said, "No, those are not your father's ashes. We're just sending you ashes." I was like, why? Why are you going to send us some random box of somebody's ashes? What possible hope could you hope this would provide to us? Um, and I went to meet the doctor who agreed to meet me to talk about his death because I was like, on his death certificate, it said, respiratory problem. Well, my dad, he had lots of health problems because of his diabetes. He never had any problem of any kind with his lungs. He was a very good breather. Either somebody killed him, which is possible, the way he abused nurses. I've seen him many times. He used to use hospitals like hotels, and they're free. Just check himself in, stay for several days, and annoy the poor nurses. Or more likely, he killed himself. Respiratory problems. He found some way to hang himself.
Wow. Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear this.
Oh, well, thank you. I have had an interesting family life.
Yes, family is very complex.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's one of the best things about life is the complexity of family. My own family is very complicated. My children are from three different moms. So I have one with my first wife, two with my second wife, and then two with my present wife, Amy. And that makes for a complicated situation.
What is the most complicated about that for you?
The most complicated thing about it for me, I think, has been trying to learn how to put myself in my wife or ex-wife's shoes. Yeah, to try and see this situation from their perspective. That's been the most complicated for me.
Getting back to your mom and dad, what led to their divorce?
The first time he cheated on her was their wedding night, and he came back. They had some kind of sexual difficulty, I guess, and he came back and threw a pair of women's underwear on her. And he himself admitted having done this, and he cheated on her, horrendously all through their marriage. And he also beat her. It's hard for me. I never saw this side of him. I guess it was when he was drunk, and it may have been a particular way he had that he part of himself that and how he related to women. He was a terrible misogynist. But my brother recalls seeing our dad beating her with our mom with a rolled up newspaper. And I do remember one time during the divorce when we were in our old house, this before Blair and his family had entered our lives. And I remember looking at Darren saying, "Help me, help me." And he and mom were pushing furniture up against the door, and dad was battering the door. And then I remember looking out the window with Darren, and Pat was hiding upstairs and looking out the window as the cops arrived. And I remember, the lights and these guys with their nightsticks and my dad throwing people. And I mean, yeah. So she had every reason to divorce him.
Typically, mental health challenges are usually intergenerational and they can get passed down in a family. Let's talk about your dad's schizophrenia. And did that pass on to anyone?
My mental health, I mean, I am an addict. I'm addicted to alcohol. I don't drink. But otherwise, my mental health, anxiety and depression have definitely been part of my adult life. Not like they were when I was a child. My anxiety and depression, again, you won't be surprised to hear, given what I've told you about my family, were crippling.
Can you say more about that? What did crippling mean for you?
What it meant for me was just like the constant daily wish to die. I mean, I struggled with suicidal ideation until quite recently, and I have made many suicide attempts. But when I was little, it was just all I wanted to do was die. That was it. And I was incredibly depressed and incredibly anxious. Yeah, as early as I can remember. I remember my earliest memory that I have retained, and we have these copies of memories, as we know, but this memory seems authentic insofar as any memory can be, is of noticing the color of the carpet in a room that I know from my mom was in our first house. And I was probably two or three, maybe younger, and wanting to die, just wanting not to exist. And that was my childhood. I mean, all I wanted to do was, as Akutagawa writes with priceless accuracy, isn't there someone kind enough to strangle me in my sleep? That's all I could think.
And was your mom aware of what you were struggling with?
You know, I mean, in my mom's defense, the times when I felt least miserable were, when I was with my mom. If I was with my mom, sitting next to my mom on the couch watching MASH, or, you know, doing my homework at the kitchen table while my mom was making dinner, those were the easiest times in my life, in my childhood. Um, I adored and worshiped my mother. I mean, she was the whole world to me, along with my older brother and my stepsister, Lisa. Those three were everything to me. And but yeah, I mean, I remember my mom one time screaming at the top of her lungs, they're gonna take you from me. They're gonna make you eat these little green pills." She was like many people of her generation, she was afraid of psychiatrists, and
Sure.
I mean, to be fair, there's good cause to be afraid of psychiatrists for most of the history of Western medicine. They were not, it was not somebody you wanted to be in contact with until quite recently. And even today, it's complicated. Yeah, so she was aware at some level, but I don't think, my mom was, if I remember one time I went to my mom, second grade probably, and said, "Mom, nobody likes me." And she was like, "What are you talking about? You have tons of friends." And again, very typical. And it turns out extremely helpful because I might have made the same mistake with my own children if that hadn't happened to me, and I hadn't really experienced in my own life how profoundly unhelpful that kind of response actually is from a parent. But that's who my mom was. I mean, she's still that way to this day. She's a lot better than she used to be. She's grown a lot wiser over the years, but she was she herself came from a very abusive household before she married my dad, and her mother was also abused. I mean, according to family legend, my grandmother murdered my grandfather, and with good cause because he was an abusive drunk. So yeah, she said she was afraid anytime she saw her own dad and or embarrassed. And so she just had these structures of deny, 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 and that's how she had survived. And so they were deployed, similarly with me. So yeah, I think she had some kind of idea, like I have this very bright, very unhappy little child on my hands, but all I can do is love him, love him as much as I can, and hopefully he gets through.
You are definitely experienced in what it feels like to be suicidal. How would you explain that kind of challenge to people who maybe don't understand it?
Yeah, it's really, really, really important question. All you can say to someone who hasn't felt that way is ask them to entertain the possibility that when a person says, "I want to die," that sure, maybe they want attention. Sure, maybe they're thinking in a selfish way. Sure, maybe they're crying for help. All those things can be true. And also, it may just simply be true. You know, it's they need attention, they're crying for help, they're being selfish, and they are in horrible pain, and desperate, and they truly just want to die. David Foster Wallace, the great American writer David Foster Wallace, who died by suicide, put it so well when someone asked him this question. He said, "Well, for a suicidal person, it's like this. You're standing in a burning building and you're asking yourself whether or not you should jump. And you're standing in that burning building all day, every day. And the question is, do I want to be roasted alive in the fire or do I want to die, but at least it looks a little less painful than being roasted alive in the fire?" And that is a pretty accurate portrait of the situation for people who suffer from chronic suicidal ideation and depression, as he did. It's like, look, neither one of these choices is attractive. Don't get me wrong. It's just one looks less painful than the other. And if you've ever had serious depression, then yes, you know what he's talking about, even if you only kind of remember it, because it is horrible, and you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy.
Talking about suicide can be really overwhelming for people. It's sort of a taboo topic. They're terrified of it. People want to fix other people who are experiencing this. What would you say that people need from others who are experiencing these ongoing feelings of suicide?
Thank you for this question. First thing I would say is that suicide is almost always in the top 10 leading causes of death worldwide. So it often outranks heart disease, often outranks many other causes of death. It way outranks cancer. Second thing I would say is if you look at the World Health Organization and you ask them what is the number one obstacle to suicide prevention worldwide, they say stigma. That's it. This is what is getting in the way of us making progress on this pandemic? How do you overcome stigma? Next reasonable question. Talking about it. That's the only way, and it's the best way. And we know statistically, best science on it, that you are never planting a seed by talking about it. We also know that there's probably no age too young to be willing to talk about this, that children as young as age 3 already have a very robust concept of death. My own 3-year-old calls it excise. Daddy, I don't want you to ever get excise. Okay, honey. I don't think you have to worry about that for a long time. Now, to make this much more concrete, when you don't know probably the people in your life who are struggling right now. You may, if you're in Michelle's line of work, you probably do. And if you're in Clancy's line of work, maybe you do. But typical person probably doesn't know. So how, if you feel like you can be a resource to these people, how can you be helpful? And if someone does come to you, how can you be helpful? Number one thing, do not try to fix their problems. Number two thing, let people know by the way that you talk about yourself, your own psychological experience, your own past, your own history, your own ongoing struggles, that you are a safe person to talk to, that you don't have boundaries when it comes to these things, that you're not afraid of the word suicide, that you're, when it says, so and so, age 38, celebrity Korean pop star died from family has not reported the cause. You are comfortable saying, oh, that's a shame. That person very clearly died by suicide and they don't want to bring it up. However it works out in your own particular life with your own particular examples. I mean, let people know you're a safe person to talk to. Another way of letting people know you're a safe person to talk to, frankly, and this is hard for all of us, is of course not being a gossip, being good at keeping secrets, not letting people see that you're a person who is not going to spread the word around if someone comes to you with her or his psychological troubles, but especially, being willing to talk about your own. If you are human, maybe you've never wanted to kill yourself, but you've been in psychological pain. You've had problems. It's just part of the human condition. If all the suffering in the world for human beings were comprised of physical suffering, it would be a pretty pleasant thing, mostly being a human being. But it's actually an incredibly difficult thing being a human being. If you can share your experiences of all the ways you have experienced psychological struggle in your life, psychological pain, all the sufferings you're going through, people will be like, oh, wow, yeah, I can talk to him. I can talk to her. She's cool, and they will reach out to you. And trust me, they will reach out to you. Maybe more than you can handle sometimes. But anyway, that's also part of it. And one thing I learned about when I was first in AA, I used to think that the old timers who were saying, you'd tell them your story and then they'd be like, well, thanks for sharing with me. And they'd come around to saying like, you are actually helping me by letting me try to help you. And you'd think like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. It's just some old timer preaching his crap, No, they're just simply telling you the truth. Every time you help someone, even if you're frustrated, even if you're fatigued, even if you're like, whoa, I don't think I can talk to another suicidal person today, or this person in Amsterdam. Right now, there is someone in Amsterdam, I will tell you, who's really wearing me out. I love him. He's going to make it, I think. He's in his late 20s. I think he's going to be okay, but he's wearing me out a little bit. Anyway, if you hear this, you know who you are. You're wearing me out a little bit, but I love you. You got to stick around for both of our sake. Anyway, he helps me every time, They do help you. And I thought my suicidal ideation would never go away. And I'll tell you, Michelle, about 3 years ago, it just went away. And it's not a coincidence because I started talking about suicide all the time and helping people all the time. And that's all it is. And it's gone. I mean, I do not suffer from it anymore. It used to be every day, all day long, just like this humming, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself, all day. I couldn't look at a rafter like I'm looking at right now without wanting to hang myself. I couldn't do it. I mean, it was just a constant battle. Just not to make an attempt was a constant battle. It's completely gone.
There's just no better intervention than talking about it. It really just comes down to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. I totally agree with you, Michelle. This work you're doing right now is the most important therapeutic work anyone can do. And we have some documentation of that, as you may know, in the Papageno effect, that if everyone who listens to this podcast, not only them, but their family and friends, their likelihood of death by suicide goes down. It's well documented. It's called the Papageno effect after Mozart's opera, the character Papageno who wants to kill himself and then talks to his friends and they talk him out of it. It's it frustrates me so much sometimes. It's like we could have cured coronavirus by talking about it or cured cancer by talking about it. We're not going to cure suicide or suicidal ideation, but we can make a huge difference for the better just by doing exactly what we're doing right now. Nothing more than that.
Just removing the stigma, just talking about it honestly.
Yeah, just talking about it honestly, just saying, yeah, depression sucks. This is what it's like. Yeah, anxiety sucks. This is what it's like. Yeah, suicidal ideation sucks. This is what it's like. That's all we got to do. Here are some strategies. I don't know if you know the work of the lived experience expert Desiree Lestage. She also works on family. She's wonderful. I think she's based in Colorado. She was living in New York, and one of her things was she'd go get herself a Frappuccino. That was like I got to find a way to keep Desiree alive, and she'd go get a Frappuccino. For me, for a while, it was McDonald's ice cream cones because they're 99 cents, over on Broadway up the street from where I live, there's this one McDonald's, and like sometimes I would go through 3 times the drive-through line, and they'd be like, "Wait a second, are you selling these on the corner or something? This is your third ice." Be like, "Yeah, I like them."
Let me ask you what advice you would have for somebody who has lost somebody to suicide and they just can't get their thoughts out of it or they can't stop ruminating about it.
Yeah, two things I would say. First of all, know that, even if you never thought you were at risk before, you are at risk now. When you lose someone to suicide, whether or not you're aware of it, you are now in a different category of person. You are at risk for suicide. So try and be willing to think that through and feel that through. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is the same thing that John Draper, the great, great Bodhisattva John Draper, told me about being a suicide survivor. He said, look, now you have a superpower. You can talk about suicide in a way that other people can't. Same goes for survivors who have lost someone to suicide. Now you can talk about suicide in a way that no one else can. You've lost someone to suicide. So you can help other people in a way that no one else can help them. Because, yeah, I've lost at least one and maybe two people to suicide, but I still do not speak with the authority of someone who has lost someone really super close. I was a child, and then my dad. It's all very hazy, but if you've lost someone really close to you to suicide, you just know things that I don't know, and that no one else knows except someone who's had that loss. That's the next thing I would say. And then the last thing I would say is, I know you feel like it's your fault. It is not your fault. That person was struggling with suicide probably for years and hiding it from you. And they probably made it as long as they did because of your love and because of you and because they knew you were there. And eventually they just got too tired, They just got worn out of fighting. They couldn't do it anymore. But it wasn't your fault. You were the one keeping them alive. So please don't, you should you should feel how you feel, of course, but the opposite of what you think is probably the truth, that there's nothing you could have done differently. You were probably one of the only reasons they were stayed around as long as they did. Truly.
Clancy, I really appreciate you being able to share all this wisdom and just being willing to talk about this topic and your honesty and your candor. It's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you and hear your experience. And I just know that the things you've talked about here today will help people who need to hear this. So I really appreciate your time here.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. I appreciate your time. And I very much, as I say, I profoundly appreciate what you're doing. I mean, this is saving lives.
Clancy Martin's book, How Not to Kill Yourself, and his other works are available wherever books are sold. Some might be surprised how strongly Clancy spoke about suicide. And I think it's a pretty rare gift to actually talk to somebody with as much experience that Clancy has. And clearly, he has studied a lot about his own experiences and this topic. And you might notice that most of the time when we talk about suicide, we jump right into safety plans and we jump right into how we need to help people and who they can call and who they can look into. And all of that is so important for suicide. And what I would want to just say about that is please take suicidal ideation, suicidal discussions, threats, talking, desires, wishes, take it seriously. Even if you think somebody is just doing it for attention, who cares? Take suicide seriously. It is a serious phenomena. It's a serious feeling that people have. It does lead to some serious thinking on the part of people who are suicidal. And that's what I really appreciated about Clancy's honesty. Yes, those safety plans are really important, but he had such a realness, and it was so rare to hear somebody just talk about how this is really an experience that's one of its own. It's not just tacked on to other mental health issues. There are people out there who think about suicide, feel suicidal, and it doesn't always have to be linked to something that's happened to them or some experiences or some mental health issues. So again, please take suicide very seriously. And I was so impressed with Clancy because as he described his experiences, you could hear that he's gone through multiple divorces. He's had a really rough childhood. He's had some significant things happen for him, but he's still so optimistic. He has been able to take his experiences and sometimes turn it into humor, sometimes turn it into just deep self-reflection, sometimes also just reflecting on his own family and what he hopes for them. But most importantly, where I see some of his strength coming through is that he has turned his pain into helping others. And that really came through to me, that him helping others has given him a strong purpose and has given him a meaning and a cause related to his own suicidal experiences. And sometimes when we are really down in the dumps or having a hard time, us connecting with others and sharing our world with them for the sake of helping them and benefiting them can really draw us out of some of the feelings that we're having. So again, please take suicide seriously. I really appreciated this episode because of its rare honesty about it. I want to also let you know that the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline can be reached across the US and Canada, and you can simply just call or text 988. It's free and it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In This Family is produced by John Moe, and music is provided by Jeremy Messersmith. You can learn more about Nexus by visiting nexusfamilyhealing.org. Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you recommend In This Family to family and friends, post about us on social, and leave a rating or review. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray. See you next time.